It's not just that we prop up Israel and give them all types of weapons and intelligence, communication, and veto every critical resolution at the UN, but it's that we also prop up Jordan and Saudi and Egypt and all of their surrounding countries to be friends with Israel. The whole game is that America is involved already. We are propping them up, and if we weren't doing that, I don't think we ever would have even attacked Iran. I don't even think we would be talking about Iran right now.
Dave Smith just slammed Steven Crowder for supporting U.S. aid to Israel, and in this clip he gets into why the U.S. launched a war in Iran because of Israel, with Steven disagreeing, and why these policies never benefit Americans in any way imaginable. Let's get right into it. This one's contentious, but it's interesting. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
I wish you and I had a passion for anything as much as these people have a passion for trying to impeach your political theater against Donald Trump. And that didn't really even gain any steam, because no one aside from Dave Smith and a few other people think this was World War III or an unconstitutional strike.
When did I say it was World War III, Stephen?
You talked about escalating this again back on social media, saying this could lead us into World War III. That's why you wanted to impeach him.
Please show my specific quote about World War III and what I said.
I will find it and I can provide it publicly.
No, because I hear a lot of people saying this to me, but I don't remember saying it. So when did I say?
You didn't think it was going to escalate global conflict?
Oh, I was concerned about escalation, but that's a very different thing than saying this is going to lead to World War III.
Okay, well, I'll rephrase then, because you did say you didn't call for it. I'm like, well, burying beneath the prison is execution, right? I don't want to do the wordplay thing. If you didn't say World War III, I apologize. It would be other people. I'll clarify that.
No. I'm not listen, I'm not saying you are lying. I'm just pointing out I don't think I said that.
Well, can we agree that that was a tenor and tone for a lot of people calling for impeaching Donald Trump? Escalation, global conflict. Right.
Yeah, there were a lot of people concerned about that.
Yes.
Sure.
How can we argue there hasn't been escalation in the Middle East, though, in general, with Israel attacking 7 of its neighbors since October 7th, continuing a genocide in Gaza, roping the U.S. into a war with Iran? So whether or not Dave called it that is a little immaterial. It seems like a legitimate concern that a war with Iran would lead to an escalated problem and conflict zone in the Middle East. That seems absolutely obvious to me, and it certainly would have if the U.S. put boots on the ground there, as Netanyahu wants, and he continues to want that and clamor for propaganda calling for more strikes against Iran, by the way.
Exactly. Is that where we are?
Are we in World War III?
No, I didn't say World War III. Has it escalated or has it de-escalated? Because I'm looking at it. Hold on a second. I said don't impeach because I actually think that our only chance at de-escalation is a president like Trump. And I think at this point, he wasn't impeached. I think an unbelievable surgical strike, agree or disagree with it, was conducted with no collateral damage, with planes out over the ocean before they woke up in the morning, and no one even said a word. That's why they couldn't retaliate, because they have no way to. I think the 12-day war ended. I think we have a ceasefire agreement in Israel and Gaza, and I think we're better off. I think
absurd. They could actually touch Americans in the Middle East with ballistic missiles if they wanted to, but they didn't want a conflict with the United States and Israel. Despite the fact that they were backed into a corner, they didn't behave what the vile neocons said they would in accordance with. They wouldn't, they didn't wipe Israel off the map. They didn't attack U.S. troops. In fact, that was one of the propaganda lines of the neocons, too, acknowledging, hey, they could strike a lot of U.S. forces in the Middle East. That's actually true, but they didn't. It wasn't because they couldn't. They weren't, dismantled in terms of their military capabilities. It seems like that's what Steven's arguing. It's no, they tipped Trump off because they didn't want a war with the United States, but they had to have a reprisal. Otherwise, they couldn't sell this to their own populace. Obviously.
Objectively, there's been de-escalation as opposed to escalation, and I don't think that's by accident. And I think if we impeach him and we follow that doctrine, I think we end up in a much worse place.
I think that we would be in a much better place if Donald Trump had simply moved to cutting off all foreign aid to Israel and supporting this war and not attacked Iran in the first place. But yes, it is absolutely. It is. Oh, okay, but that's a pretty big deal. So it is absolutely true that after we dropped those bunker busters on the Iranian nuclear sites, and then they responded with, the kind of a typical Iranian response where they just wanted to save face, but really wanted to make sure that they didn't escalate the situation at all and gave advanced warning before they sent those missiles back. Donald Trump took that off ramp immediately and did de-escalate things after that. And
I'll give him credit for that. That's better than what the neocons like Mark Levin and Ben Shapiro were calling for, and that's boots on the ground. But think about that. When you're giving him credit for that, in relation to the status quo means that, well, he still launched that operation in the first place, and that's getting into a new war when he said we wouldn't. So I'm glad the off-ramp was taken, but we didn't even have to get to that point to begin with. So Dave's right.
I think it's great that he did that. Again, the whole thing never needed to be started to begin with, but we'll see. We're kind of in halftime of this war now, and we'll see where this goes. You know, every time Netanyahu's interviewed about this, he's still talking about the capabilities that Iran is building back up. They're vowing to rebuild their nuclear program. Donald Trump is saying that'll be a big problem if it happens again. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. And Dave's right. Just on Ben Shapiro a few weeks ago, Netanyahu was spreading this propaganda how Iran could touch New York City, Boston, Washington, or Miami with their atomic guns. He's starting the propaganda campaign again. We have to hope that the United States is kept out of this. It's hard to know for sure. I'm glad the off-ramp was taken, but I don't think we've heard the end of this. So again, Dave is totally right. We're kind of in halftime here. It's a ceasefire. It's not the end of a war, and the U.S. could get drawn back in, especially if you listen to vile genocidal maniacs like Netanyahu and his carve-outs in the United States.
See.
I don't think Iran saber rattling is anything new, right? I think that's happening no matter who's president. Yeah,
that's right. And we'll see. We'll see where this goes.
I do think the ceasefires are pretty new. I think they're pretty unique, and I think it's kind of a calling card of Donald Trump, which is why I wouldn't want to see him impeached or buried beneath the prison. I also, and here's the thing, when we're talking about Israel funding the war, we can go to that. We can go back to Iran if you would like to, but I agree with you in not funding. And this is a genuine question. If we stop funding Israel, right, stop foreign aid, I want to use the correct term, foreign aid to Israel, as well as, for example, Syria, list the country, my answer is yes. We also bridled Israel quite a bit, which I will say I'm a fan of. They don't know what the fuck they're doing, one of the greatest moments in presidential history. I don't think there's a world in which Netanyahu apologizes to Qatar outside of President Trump walking him. And I think that we saw even since then, going in the timeline, Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance saying, if they annex the West Bank, we'll stop all funding, right? I think that we're leading the dance, and I think that without the bridling of the United States, in other words, if it's two guys, we lock them in a racquetball court, Israel, Palestine, you work it out, I think you'd see a much worse genocide. But I'd let the chips fall where they may.
Well, I'll have to disagree, but it's just so frustrating what placates the American right now to see him talk about theatrics. The theatrics making Netanyahu apologize, not using U.S. leverage to withdraw any aid to Israel because it never manifests into that. You know, talking about how they can't annex the West Bank. Well, Stephen, I'm going to tell you, if they do defy the wishes of J.D. Vance and the president, if they do annex the West Bank or violate the ceasefire, which they've already violated, we'll see if it crumbles. They've killed over 100 Palestinians since that time. But if they annex the West Bank, no U.S. aid will be withdrawn from Israel. I guarantee it. I don't even think if they bombed England that U.S. aid would be withdrawn from Israel. It just isn't how it works. So all these theatrics about he doesn't know what the F he's doing, and then going back the next day to defending him, telling the Knesset to drop charges against him, it's not showing any leverage. It's theatrics. All the leverage is from the Israeli influence in our government because of AIPAC and the Israel lobby. That's why we got sucked into that Iran war in the first place.
Either direction.
I think it's absolutely not the case that if America wasn't backing Israel, and when you talk about this, because you say foreign aid to all the countries, right? You got to think it's not just that we prop up Israel and give them all types of weapons and intelligence, communication, and veto every critical resolution at the UN, but it's that we also prop up Jordan and Saudi and Egypt and all of their surrounding countries to be friends with Israel. And so the idea that if we pulled all of that back, Israel would be more aggressive, I just think is absolutely wrong. I think they would have no choice. In fact, it's the moral hazard that America always creates when we go in back. Like, okay, Ukraine's willing to fight and not take the deal because they got a blank check from America. And same with Israel. They get way bigger than their bridges because the U.S. is backing them up. And
absolutely true. I don't even see how this is debatable. They bombed 7 countries since October 7th. Would they do that without U.S. support? I just don't think so. They're the only power in the region, unless you count Pakistan as technically not in the Middle East, but they're the only Middle East country with nuclear weapons too, with technology stolen from the United States in the 1960s in the Dimona project, by the way. Do you think that they would be able to act this bellicose without the United States? I just don't see it. Without the bankroll, the guarantees, security guarantees, some explicit, some implied, I just don't think they would be able to get away with all this war, with all this clean break strategy and destabilizing all these regimes while the U.S. bankrolls it all.
And I think we should just get out of that business altogether. And honestly, if we agree on that, there's really not much else to argue about, because that's the whole game. The whole game is that America is involved already. We are propping them up. And if we weren't doing that, I don't think we ever would have even attacked Iran. I don't even think we would be talking about Iran right now.
Yeah, see, that's where I disagree. And that's where I disagree. And by the way, the same people you talk about, Saudi, and by the way, my answer is yes, right? Just to be clear. And just so you know, I'll get accused of being anti-Semitic for that position. I said it to Ben Shapiro on the show in 2015. I said, let's just stop funding all of it. Because if you add it up collectively, not just the nations who align with Israel, but the nations who would probably like to wipe Israel out, they technically come out ahead because we spread money around. And I think it's foolish. We would agree on that.
Well, hey, I agree with Steven Crowder on that, but then it's foolish to say that that's not why the U.S. intervened in Iran. What threat does Iran pose to the United States? Which Americans has Iran killed? You know, this is absolutely absurd to believe that Iran is a threat to the United States, and we'd be talking about that without our support for Israel. Why? Why? It's the product of this entangling alliance.
But Saudi Arabia is an interesting example. Because when we're talking about Iran, I don't care if Israel sees Iran as a threat. I care if Iran is a potential threat to the United States. Obviously, the fact that they're run by a death cult who chant death to America isn't enough to go on. I'm not saying that.
That's good. I'm glad if you think that that's not enough to go on, because that's what Mark Levin and Ben Shapiro and some others of that ilk have cited as reasons why they're a threat. Because I don't know about their weapons or capabilities to strike the United States or their precedent for striking the United States, but have you seen their chants? Their chants! You know, when you reduce a conflict down to chants, it's just a psyop. It's just a CIA psyop to draw the U.S. in. So I'm glad he's not on that train. I want to hear his reasoning, though.
But I do think it's notable that every single one of their neighbors, including places that we would consider, certainly in the West, radically Islamic, are very concerned and keep saying, hey, Iran can't have a nuke. So it's not just us. Saudi Arabia has said that if Iran nuclearizes, they absolutely would have to. It would be an arms race. Why do you think that every other surrounding nation who would be more sympathetic through religion, through culture to this nation have begged those capable to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons and overseeing governing committees? I know we don't want to use the word intelligence because people do wordplay with that. The IAEA saying, yeah, they're close. Why does everyone think that a nuclearized Iran in that world, and pretty much every president or war criminal also acknowledge that it's a problem, and Dave Smith has caught something that all these people miss to the degree that it's an impeachable and executable offense? That's my differing opinion.
Yeah, I mean, again, to say, oh, Dave Smith's caught something that all these people miss. Like, what are you talking about? The government and the Sunni Gulf states? Yeah, okay, I've caught something that all of that. This is like saying, oh, you think you caught something that the CDC missed in the height of COVID or something like that?
No, it's not.
Yes.
I think you did catch things the CDC missed. I think you were right in COVID.
Okay, I think I'm right on this too. I think that obviously the radical Sunni states hate the radical Shiite state because they are regional rivals. And, you know, by the way, it was a bunch of Egyptians and Saudis and Al-Qaeda who was backed by Saudi Arabia who came and knocked our towers down. It wasn't any radical Shiites. That's our beef. That's the reason we supposedly launched this whole war on terrorism.
Absolutely right. And if you look, a Saudi intelligence agent, Omar al-Bayoumi, went to San Diego and was involved in trying to recruit two of the future 9/11 hijackers, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Midhar, to be inside men in the CIA, not telling the FBI about that. And then that blowing up in their face because eventually, you know, they only told the FBI about that in August of 2001 and the plot was too far. So Saudi connections to the 9/11 plot, they're not just conspiracy theories. They're documented in government releases. Even if, you know, I don't really trust the FBI, but even the FBI has released documentation saying that Omar al-Bayoumi, the guy who bought, you know, apartments and helped these two hijackers get their feet set up straight when they came to the United States in San Diego, he had a 50-50 chance of foreknowledge about 9/11. That's according to the FBI in a leaked document.
To get the radical Sunnis. Now, of course, our priority has to be getting the radical Shiites. And your buddy Ben Shapiro actually kind of admitted why on his show when
why do you mischaracterize, Dave? Why do you do that? He's not my buddy. I said I talked to him about that, and I presented.
Oh yeah, I guess that's true. You guys, well, I didn't mean to mischaracterize. You were talking about having talked to him. Yeah, I forgot you guys you're falling out. But regardless, he was celebrating when Al Qaeda took over Syria because hey, we broke up the Shiite crescent, and now Iran can't move weapons into Lebanon, and isn't that great for Israel? Well, I have a different perspective of that as an American.
I sure do too, where I don't want an Al-Qaeda emir that founded the original Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria. It was called Al-Nusra as the leader of Syria, which he now is. It's al-Shara. There was a $10 million bounty on his head. He fought against U.S. troops in Iraq as part of Al-Qaeda in Iraq under Zarqawi. And he's just, he's the preferential choice from Israel. And somehow this small, tiny country in the Middle East, the only one with nukes, can convince the United States to side with Al-Qaeda in Syria against Assad. That's exactly what happened. It was treasonous, and Tulsi Gabbard was right to call it out as treasonous at the time.
And so, look, I'll say it like this, okay? Nobody wants Iran to have a nuclear weapon. In the wake of 9/11, the George W. Bush administration, led by the neocons in all of their wisdom, decided to put Iraq, Iran, and North Korea on the axis of evil. 3 countries who weren't friends, and the only thing they had in common was that they had nothing to do with 9/11. Now, in this paradigm, North Korea decided to go nuclear. They developed nuclear weapons, and we've really never bothered them since. Gaddafi tried to denuclearize and de-weaponize and got rid of his chemical weapons program. We went and overthrew him and let him get sodomized to death. Iran tried to play in the middle, and they went, hey, we're letting you know that we've mastered the fuel cycle, we're enriching uranium, but we're only going to do it up to the level that we're legally allowed to. It was a standoff. It was, hey, don't attack us and we won't make nukes. But if you attack us, we could make nukes.
Right.
That was always the whole game.
I understand.
That was the whole game, and actually, if you wanted, despite all this rhetoric about how Donald Trump masterfully stopped this Iranian regime from getting a nuke, I don't know what policy would have encouraged the Iranian regime to want to break out and seek a nuke more than the policy that the United States just unleashed and that Israel just unleashed on Iran. Because now they have the ultimate incentive that the biggest bullies on the block, the United States and Israel, are going to team up to bomb that country. Under specious reasons, nonetheless, they don't have a nuclear weapon. Even if you listen to U.S. intelligence and Tulsi Gabbard's annual threat summary just weeks prior to the U.S. strike, not only didn't they have one, they weren't building one. There was no evidence that they reconstituted their nuclear program. But now if I'm an Iranian nationalist, if I'm close to the Ayatollah and the ruling regime in Tehran, I'm telling them, you have to fast track a nuke right now. Be more like North Korea. Be less like Gaddafi, where Gaddafi gave up his weapons to the United States. And, he paid a price for that. He paid a very, violent price for that. I'm not saying he's great. I don't think any country's great. I don't think any ruler is great. But that's just the truth. He paid the price for doing that, being disarmed and having a U.S.-led UN coalition or NATO coalition go in there, depose him, sodomize him, as Dave said. It's gruesome, but that's what happened to him. That is what happened to him. Whereas the Kim regime is still in power in North Korea with nukes. The U.S. doesn't put regime change on the table with them at all anymore. So if you wanted to inspire Iran to get a nuke, you would have done exactly, I think, what Donald Trump did. So that's where we're at. Our policies toward Israel, they just never pay off. It's an entangling alliance that the founding fathers rightly prophesized would lead to disaster, would lead to debt, inheriting all the enemies of our allies. That's exactly what we've done. That's exactly what the U.S. government has done as it pertains to Iran specifically. They're the enemy of Israel, so now they're by default the enemy of the United States, and the U.S. gets sucked into those wars, despite the fact that they don't threaten the United States whatsoever. Even when they were, again, backed into a corner, they didn't even strike our troops in our region, in that region. And we know that they could. We had intelligence showing that they could. The neocons even acknowledged that they could, and they didn't. They didn't behave like the most vile neocon propagandists said they would. So all of our support to Israel is backward. I'm glad that Crowder seems to acknowledge that to some extent, but the idea that the U.S. would strike Iran and get into this war without our ties to Israel, I just think that's preposterous. And equally preposterous is the idea that Israel would act more warlike, there'd be more, Israeli bellicosity in the Middle East if they didn't have aid from the United States. I think it's such a preposterous argument. I just can't understand it whatsoever. I don't think you can actually be honest with yourself if you've looked into these issues to actually think that, to act like without U.S. support, Israel would attack, more of its neighbors or exacerbate more conflicts. It's already trying to expand the West Bank settlements in Syria and Lebanon. We have the ceasefire in Gaza now, but it's a 2-year genocide, and who knows if it's going to hold. You have, Benjamin Netanyahu talking about or flirting with annexing the West Bank. You have Smotrich talking about how there will be settlements in Gaza, Israeli settlements. That's what you get from Israel under the bankroll of the United States. So even if your prediction is we don't know what will happen if we take U.S. aid away from Israel, well, not knowing what will happen is a risk I'm willing to take. I don't think we should aid Israel. But I want to hear from you. Is Dave right? Is Steven right? Does the U.S. need to be freed from Israel and the AIPAC lobby completely and get into a non-interventionist foreign policy? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Please subscribe to Dave Smith too. Thanks for this debate. Some parts of it were productive, I think. Some parts weren't. Lots of interruptions, but hey, some things were substantive. I'll give Steven that. And if you like this video, please consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. If you do that, you can help support my channel. I'll really appreciate that. So much so, in fact, that I'll return the favor by giving you access to all of my videos. Those are the members only ones before they go live to the general public on YouTube. Also, for a free copy of my first book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below. It'll shoot you off to the site. Plug in your email. I'll email you that right to your inbox. No cost whatsoever. It tells the story of how the U.S. was transformed from a decentralized constitutional republic to a worldwide global empire that wages wars on behalf of Israel instead of the United States and the taxpayers that fund this government. Until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.